Nate, so we have a range of topics that we like to talk about in the podcast. We talk about marketing, we talk about running programs in your school, we talk about vision and purpose. And, we're like over 120 episodes deep at this point on topics. And something that you and I have wanted to do for a little bit is explore some of the topics that are important to school owners, that are important to us, but explore it through a different lens. And so recently, longtime listener, Margaret. Hello, Margaret. I'm glad you're here.
Hello, Margaret. Morning. Glad you're here.
So Margaret emailed me because she has an opportunity. And she laid out the scenario in the email, and it was somewhat complex, which is okay. But as I was reading it, I had all these questions that I wanted to ask her, because the questions that I would ask of her would determine, or her answers to them would determine the advice I would give, so to speak. And so I think this might be a really good opportunity for us to actually bring one of our listeners onto the podcast, ask the question live here. And Nate, we kind of talk through it together and unpack this situation and see if we can be of help. So again, Margaret, thanks for coming on. I'm glad that you were willing to, willing to experience this exposure. But the topic has to do with an opportunity you have around scaling your studio up, looking at a potential space, looking at ways that you can expand your studio, and assessing the opportunity around a space you have. Now, obviously, we've talked about this topic before. Episode 17, we talked about how to evaluate a space. Episode 71 and 72, Nate and I unpacked his experience of entering Brooklyn Music Factory's third commercial space in 13 years. Those were really good episodes, and there were 10 lessons that he learned from opening BMF's just absolutely gorgeous space in Brooklyn. And then episode 104, we did another one on opening a location. And so we are exploring this again, but we're doing it from the perspective of how would one person in particular explore that opportunity? So I think we should just jump into it, Nate. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm all for it. And Margaret, thanks again for being ready and willing to test out an episode style that actually Daniel and I have never tried before.
Okay.
So we appreciate you. And I would love it if you wanted to start by sort of summarizing what the opportunity is for you.
Okay. Thanks for having me on. I'm hoping you guys can help. I've been teaching piano and voice lessons in my home for the past about 15 years. And then about 6 years ago, I hired one contract employee, and she went into other families' homes and taught piano lessons. And then about 2 years ago, I found Daniel's group lessons program and implemented that. So I scaled my studio a little bit more that way, with converting almost all of my private piano students into the group lessons. And this year, my contract teacher is also coming into my home and teaching 4 of those classes. And she would like to teach more, but I don't have space. So I feel like my next step is, get out of my house and find a commercial location. I really would like to be out of my home. I would like to offer her more opportunity for work. I would like to scale some more, hire somebody else. But I'm not a risk taker. I tend to do things very cautiously and with as much forethought as possible. So I'm just not sure what my next best step is. So my options are, commit to a lease somewhere, and then, how big of a space do I do that? Or buy something. And the lease option does not sound good to me because it feels like just throwing money away. Where if I bought something, it could be an investment property and it's kind of a win-win. I can grow my own personal financial wealth and grow my business at the same time. So kind of leaning towards that. Also, I live in an area that is developing at an exponential rate. There's huge growth here, which means there's actually not a lot of retail space available because of the demand for it. And then the cost per square foot is crazy high. So
sounds like Brooklyn.
It's not quite Brooklyn,
but same idea. Just keeps going up.
Yeah, probably true for everywhere. But there are several old homes. This was a small town about 15 years ago. There are several old homes that have recently been rezoned by the town to be mixed use. So it would be possible to purchase it as a residential property and convert it to commercial. So I found one that I like, and I had a meeting with our town to go over what exactly would I need to do to get it up to code. And it's quite overwhelming. There's a lot of things that would have to be changed. And so I got a good idea of what will need to be changed, but, I don't have exact numbers. And in order to get exact numbers, I'm going to have to put some money down. I will have to pay the due diligence and earnest money to have access to the property, and then hire a surveyor, a landscape architect, a building architect to create the plans and give me an exact list of all of the expenses. So I'm worried if I, take those steps and then I find out, wow, this is way more expensive than I thought it was going to be. And then I will have kind of, again, thrown money away for nothing. So, yeah.
Interesting. What would be most helpful for you coming out of this conversation? Are you trying to determine if one particular property is the thing to do? Are you trying to determine whether it's worth even doing an exploration? Are you wanting to come out of this and know?
Yeah, I don't know if you can give that to me, but I would love to feel a stronger idea of, yes, I should move forward or not.
On
the property that I'm looking at.
Got it. Okay. Nate?
Margaret, I'm going to summarize for our listeners what I heard, if that's okay.
Sure.
Ooh, I like that.
Okay. At the core of the conversation is your identification as one who doesn't take risks. Okay, so let's just tee it up like that. So if you're a listener and you're feeling like you identify with Margaret, like, I'm not really a risk taker, I'm gonna give you an example of something I wrote down that's a clear sign of one who likes to move slowly and with very clear intention. You've been doing it in your home for 15 years, right? In your living room or wherever. Like, if I were to come hang, I'm guessing I would come into the living room for my lesson or the garage or something, right?
No, I do have a dedicated space.
Oh, you have a dedicated space. Sweet. Like, that's where I am at right now in my home in Brooklyn. Okay, number one, underlying it is you need everything to sort of be laid out clearly for you to be able to take that next step, like to jump from one stone to the next to try to get across the river. You need to know you're going to make it onto the next stone and not fall into the water. That's the first thing I hear. The second thing I hear is that you're trying to assess why small business owners choose one option, option A, which is leasing a commercial space, versus option B, which is investing in ownership of a space. That's the second issue I hear you teeing up. Because I don't get a really clear sense yet whether or not you understand, or maybe you'd like a little more understanding or around why doesn't a business owner always choose lease, for example? Why is that always strategically a better choice? Or why is it strategically a better choice to buy whenever you have that option? That's the second issue I hear. But then I hear another issue that you're bringing up here when you talk about your one contractor that you have. And there's a growth opportunity, and you're trying to assess how strongly you feel about that growth opportunity. Do you actually want to grow this business like another 4x over the next 5 years? I I heard that issue come up too. So I sort of hear like, on the one hand, as Daniel would put it well, is like there's a real core coaching issue, which is just addressing our risk averseness and what that means, how that served us in the past and how that might serve us in the future, or maybe it's actually limiting us. Mm-hmm. And then I hear a couple of other awesome issues, which is our opportunities, which is how do we just get smart around leasing versus owning? And then also how do we get smart around growth and understanding clearly where we want to be in 3 to 5 years. So I don't think we can cover it all today, but I think what we should do is take your answer to Daniel's last question, which is just looking at the ownership opportunity, but trying to frame it within 3 of those columns. What does it feel like to be risk averse and own? What does it feel like to grow a business 3 to 5 years over the next 3 to 5 years and own? And what is the consequences of a choice of owning versus leasing? Does that sound like a good, like if we could rock that in 40 minutes, would that just be?
Please, yes.
Okay. One thing to be very clear on with being risk averse and identifying ourselves that way, or an exercise that I often do for myself, Margaret, whenever I find myself sort of like looking, or I keep writing in my journal one identification, like, why won't I take the risk? The version I write in my journal is lack of commitment sometimes. That's not the same as risk averse. I'm just saying, like, I will write that to myself. I'll be like, hold on, dude, why are you only 80% in? And then I'll go through it. So when we're addressing that, the exercise I like to do for myself, really just making a historical analysis of when it served me and it's when it's failed me. So for example, if I were to ask you, when's an example, something in your life, doesn't have to be business related, it could be any related, where being risk averse turned out to be truly beneficial? Okay, got it. Okay, so I think this is a good exercise for you to take, off air at some point and be like, hold on a sec. Let me give you an example of my own, if we've been risk averse at times in Brooklyn Music Factory's history, and it's been a huge failure. For example, when we first launched Big Music Games, our gaming app, it was an iOS app, and we were all in, and we were burning cash, like, I don't know, $4,000 or $5,000 a month. And that felt very risky to us. And at some point, we hit a quarterly planning meeting, and we had 500 active users. We were generating something like $800 a month in recurring revenue, or I don't remember what it was, from the app. But we were too scared by the investment. And so what did we do? We pulled the plug on everything and shut the whole thing down for like 2 years. And it was, in hindsight, when I go back and study that choice, that was a grave error. Grave error on our part, because we already had 500 families playing this game, right? And then years later, when we fired it back up and now we have a bunch of people playing again, it took us a lot of capital to get back rolling again and to find that number of players. So that was an example of where we looked at the things and we thought, this feels too risky. We shouldn't take the risk. Grave error on our part. Really poor business choice, right? So Daniel's really, really good on this kind of thing. So I'm going to actually just pause and see if Daniel has any additions around how to tackle identification and maybe just sort of reframe it. Because Daniel, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this.
So Margaret, actually, I have a question pursuant to what Nate was just saying. Because we're talking about the nature of being risk averse. I'd actually like to just define something else, which is, how would you know that you should definitely move forward on this? And let me be more specific. I'm talking the numbers. Have you even identified, have you run numbers on the potential model if you were to expand? Have you run numbers on what your expenses would be? Do you have a dollar amount over which you would not invest in this and under which you would? Have you done any
Yes, I
projections
have.
around that? I'm just curious. I'd love to hear about it.
Okay. So where I am right now with the amount of students I have, the income that we're generating, and paying my contract teacher, and just being an LLC and the taxes, all of that, the expenses of the studio that I have right now, I have enough revenue where I have enough left over that I know I could afford like a $2,000 mortgage comfortably, no problem. And then on top
Okay.
of that, I actually don't know the number, what it would be, but I believe I have to have a different kind of insurance than I have right now. But what I guesstimate would be very similar to our own home for utilities and internet and all of that. I know I
Right.
can
Yeah.
cover that. Then the expense of the renovations and the down payment on the house, that's going to come from what's it called? The equity we have in our home right now. I'm going to borrow from. So
Got
um
it.
what it worries me is not really knowing what the expenses would be for the renovations. I know how much I can spend on it. I don't know how much it's going to end up being.
You would have to spend money to even get the information necessary to know what that number would be. So you've built the model, you understand what your break-even point is, how many students you'd have to have in that location. You've done a lot of work around that, but it really just comes down to this is what it'll cost to purchase. This is the down payment, but there's this one category where you're like, yeah, I don't know what that number would be. Now, let's pretend that no renovations needed or whatever. Given everything you know about the model that you will put into place should you decide to expand, and given what you know about how much it costs and utilities, all that sort of thing, would you
100%,
move
because
forward?
I can continue what I'm
So it's
doing,
really
and then
just
anything I add on
renovations.
top of that with new students or hire another teacher, yeah, it's
So what I feel like I'm hearing is that this is definitely a yes for you, except there's a question mark in one category, and that is preventing you
it's
from moving forward.
huge. Because
What's
Okay,
huge?
hold on. Wait. Yeah,
the
what's huge?
not
What feels huge
knowing
about it?
how much it's going to cost, and like I don't think I don't trust that I can even guess correctly what the renovations would cost.
Interesting.
Who you
Nate?
outlined the team you'd need in order to get that information. What's the can you guess on how much it would cost to hire them to
I'm
just
still trying
give
to
you
even
that
get
information?
in touch with someone to talk to me. That I've reached out to several architect companies and haven't gotten calls back from many of them, and two that have called me back aren't interested in my kind of project. So not yet.
Okay, so dig it. Here we come into another. Let me reframe what you just said for a second, Margaret, because I love how Daniel just was like, wait, so it looks like it's one piece of information that we need. You said, I'm not able to get in touch with an architect that's interested, and the only two that have called back have said, we don't do your type of project. So that's a classic resistance point. You don't want the first person to call back and be like, I'm all in. No, you don't. You're testing your forecast model. Daniel asked, have you set up a whole projection? I would say you haven't yet, because all you did was outline the expenses and say, this is what we could afford at a break even. That's not a growth plan. That's I can kind of do it plan. I want a 3 to 5 year, here's how many students I'll have by 2026. Here's how many students I'll have by 2030. And so I'll move from a net income of, whatever it is now, 28% in your school to 40%, and we'll go from gross revenue of whatever, $180,000 to $700,000. I want to see that. Like, I want you to write us back in the next 24 hours and be like,
Okay.
here you go, Nate. I did my best. Take a look at this, right? So that's what I meant by how do we assess the growth plan? The fact that you can do this, i.e. cover your utilities, cover your mortgage, cover your basic operating expenses with just the current number of students,
That's good.
that's really good. That, of
Yeah.
course, you're on the pod right now talking through the opportunity. That's because you've already built something that's on quite strong legs.
Mm-hmm.
Dig it? But that's not an opportunity. That's just saying like, hey, I could do this also. This episode is sponsored by BigMusicGames.com. As our listeners know, Brooklyn Music Factory is all about a fun, fluency-first approach to music lessons. And at the foundation of our teaching methods are rhythm, melody, harmony, and songwriting games that challenge students as young as 4 years old to train their ears and flex that musical mind. Because when you set an intention of gamifying every single lesson, you're going to find improved attendance, increased play at home, and higher student retention. So we've set up a website just for our listeners so you can start playing today. Go to bigmusicgames.com/7FMS and create your free account. Again, that's bigmusicgames.com/7FMS. And if you join today, I'm going to send you a personal invite to join our weekly teacher training call with me and Greggy Bizzle, our chief game designer. Go ahead and put play back into practice with Big Music Games. Let me tell you about a conversation I just had with my friend who's got an amazing drum school in New Jersey. He does the same thing you do, where the students all come into the house, but they go to a separate, they go into, he's got like a basement, kind of similar to, this is the basement of my home, similar to this studio, right? And he has the same opportunity, except he wants to go into a leased space. And when I asked him why, he said two things. Number one, my wife, Lori's just a little bit annoyed of the parents coming and going on our property. It's like we kind of want to move on from that. I was like, okay, that's a total lifestyle choice. And then she's like, and he was like, and number two, like it could be cool eventually to be able to create it into a performance venue because, performing in this part of New Jersey is a little bit tricky and there's not a lot of great opportunities. And I was like, okay, hold on, dude. So one's a lifestyle choice, and number two is because you're trying to address some of your gigging opportunities. I was like, okay, those don't really feel like a business growth opportunity, right? Those feel like some other issues, which I appreciate. Of course, we appreciate the lifestyle. I totally get that you were like, I'm ready to move the business off of my personal property. That makes total sense to all of us, right? However, that's like when 10 or 15 minutes ago, we were talking about how to reframe your question. One of the ways is to know what's the true growth opportunity. Because knowing exactly where you can get to, nobody knows where they're going to be in 2026, right? But you can forecast and project where you want to be. So that would simply be the number of new teachers you've hired, the number of new students that they're each carrying, the number of additional group piano classes you're teaching, the number of additional group, you have a glee club I saw, which I loved. I love the dance moves, by the way. Stellar video on your website. Everybody should go check it out. MF Music Studio, I think it's .com, yeah? So everybody should go just click on Glee Club and vibe the video because it's really heartwarming. Okay, so in your growth plan, you're thinking, how many more group classes can I fit in any given week? What is the income opportunity there? What's the gross revenue? What's the net income opportunity around those, right? Because I'm going to just posit this. My guess is you're going to be even more persistent with finding a good architect to do the job once you see where you can be in 5 years. That's, and I'll end with this comment, even though I've shared it in one of those previous eps that Daniel and I did on BMF's commercial space, is you want to know where I found our architect? From my network. The same guy, Joel, who 25 5 years ago helped us renovate our home in Brooklyn. And he had never done a school. He didn't do any, he did almost no commercial. And I was like, dude, come on now. We've known each other 25 years. And imagine what you could build. Like, you can build the next community center in this neighborhood that'll serve like thousands of families. Come on. And he actually just comped me the initial plans and research. And then, of course, I paid him his fee after that once we were all in and got the capital together. But he was like, yeah, totally. Let me just sketch you something. This is really fun, and I love your vision. Right? So I'm not saying that that's going to happen for you, Margaret, but my guess is you're only like 2 degrees separation from an architect friend. You just need to tap into that network and start asking around. And then be like, here's my vision. Who wants in?
So let me jump in here and actually ask. So I think what often happens in conversations like this is the issues become clarified. And I know from my experience in working with coaches for a long, long time that sometimes I'm just so close to something that in looking back on what was holding me up from making a decision, there were a lot of disparate issues that were clouding my judgment. But what it comes down to is really knowing what's the next issue I should tackle? What's the next decision I have to make? I feel like I came into this conversation not yet knowing what that would be for you, but I feel like I'm getting a much clearer sense myself. So I have 2 questions for you. The first one's really short. Do you feel like the issue is more clarified after us talking here for a little bit? Okay, then my second question is, I always love to invite pushback. So we've been talking now for a little bit. Where do you feel like we're missing the point? Where do you feel like you still have questions? Or what new questions have arisen because there's greater clarity? I'm just curious. I want to take your temperature. I want you to kind of jump in here and move the conversation along.
I guess I still, have a little bit of fear about, sure, I can write down what I want to happen with, how many more students I get and hiring new teachers and stuff. But that doesn't mean it's not actually going to happen. And if I write that all out and I'm like, okay, that makes this more possible, and I count on that. I don't know. I'm just afraid to count on that kind of projection.
Yeah. Can I quote you? Sure. Like, I wrote this down on my card from 22 minutes ago or whatever. You were like, 15 years ago, I started the thing. 6 years ago, I brought on, what's your teacher's name? Cheryl, right? I remember she does an awesome photo on the About page. 6 years ago, you brought on Cheryl. That was a risk.
It didn't feel like a risk.
How did that turn out, Margaret?
Because, it turned out
great.
But
how did it turn out was the question.
So long.
Okay, it turned out great. So, Margaret, which is awesome. She's still around 6 years from now. So if it wasn't going great, this would be a totally different coaching call. But anyways, Margaret, hold on. So here's your exercise around Cheryl. You said 6 years ago, it didn't feel like a risk. You brought her on, love it. And then you're saying it's going great. You want to write down specifically the definition of growing great. What was it like at your studio without Cheryl? What's it been like with Cheryl? You could just write down 3 to 5 bullets. You can be like, number 1, I feel like I have a team. Number 2, I'm working fewer hours because she's working more. Number 3, we've added 72 students over the 6 years. So we've grown from this number to that number. So now you're actually data-driven in your projection. If I add a second Cheryl, I can assume that over 6 years, it'll at least look as good as this, because that's what I'm capable of developing in 6 years with Cheryl. So then let me go to this next move. The next thing I wrote down was group lessons. So somehow, like, you listened to a pod or whatever, and Daniel was like, you should go check out our group lessons. And you did, which is a risk. I don't even know what it costs, but you spent money and you invested money in the thing. You invested time, which is way more valuable than money. You didn't have any time, but you invested the time. Then you bought a whole pile of gear and you opened it up. What was the outcome from doing 2 years of group lessons? What was it like before and after? How many students did you have before and how many did you have after? How many hours were you working before and how many hours are you working now?
I've like doubled
Give me
the
a
number
quick
of
guesstimate.
students and for the same amount of time.
Okay, so that should, by the way, Daniel, that goes in your testimonials.
Everybody go check out grouplessons.com. Go ahead.
Yeah, totally, everybody. I what did you say, Morgan? I doubled the number of students in half the time. That's totally like a weight loss program or something. I love it. Okay, so anyways, that's exactly how you build the forecast of growth in your new home, in your new space, but with data. And the data is coming from the work that you've actually done. It's not fair for you to be like, let me study Nate's Brooklyn Music Factory forecast and be like, I'm going to build my next school based on that. You can, of course, you can use principles from it. You can be like, oh, group lessons work. Look, Nate uses songwriting group lessons. That works, right? But there's no better data than looking at your own actions and the results. That is just vital. And so like when I said I was risk averse with big music games, I cut it off. That's because I went back and looked at my actions. I reread all of my Evernotes from 2017 and 2018 on the topic. And I was like, oh, here's when I made that choice, when I made that choice, and look at what the results were. And that's like a bummer story. That's not like, that's like a great optimistic story like the one you just shared. That was like a wish I hadn't have done that story, you know? But they're both really valuable when we're forecasting future growth. Does that help a little bit in terms of like how you actually go about developing faith in your projection? Okay, sweet.
This episode is sponsored by grouplessons.com. If you're looking for a group piano method that is easy to implement in your studio or school, look no farther than Piano Express from grouplessons.com. Because unlike most group piano methods, Piano Express allows students to make individual progress within the context of a larger group. And because of the at-home practice tools and gamified curriculum, students using the Piano Express method make faster progress than the average method book student. And that helps students feel excited, accomplished, and motivated to learn new music. Also, the system is really adaptable. We've got teachers using the system in their home studios, and we have many large commercial studios running our 3-room model that allows you to see up to 24 students per hour with just 2 teachers. So if you'd like to learn more about Piano Express, navigate to grouplessons.com and sign up for a free demo. You'll get to look at the method, our app and teacher guides, and we'll even give you a sneak peek of our implementation plan that has helped hundreds of studios start their group program in just a few weeks. I do want to point out that, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, I do want to point out that at one point you said that it was just this uncertainty around the renovation cost that's preventing you from moving forward. But now within the last 5 minutes, you're saying that you feel fear because you're not sure about the projection. So it is actually more than just the renovation cost. And again, I'm not trying to call you out. I'm just saying that a lot of times with these decisions we have to make, the bigger problem is more the emotional hurdles we have to overcome. And I think a lot of times we get up in our head and we try to get certainty. We run the numbers, we run the projections, and then we still don't understand why we procrastinate or why we don't move forward. And again, not calling you out, this has actually been my problem historically. Not everybody kind of operates that way. I think most people do, not everyone does, but I've done that where, again, speaking about group lessons, I co-founded Piano Express in 2005, pioneered this group model, but then waited 3 years to implement it myself, or a version of it myself, all out of fear. And it's like, not only, I didn't even need a projection at that point. I'd already been teaching in the group style, but as a summer camp, because that felt safer to me. And it really just came down to, I had to hit an emotional rock bottom where I literally was out of room in my studio. I didn't have more time to give. And so it became a necessity. But I wish I could get those 3 years back, unless I meet Doc Brown from Back to the Future, I'm not going back and getting those 3 years back. And I would just say that I think for you, yes, running these numbers is going to be important. I think there's some practical steps you can take where you invest some time now to gather a number of quotes around what this house renovation will be like. But at the end of the day, I think you could have the world's most perfect, or you could have done absolutely everything you could, but you will still hit this emotional barrier of do I or don't I? And at a certain point, you do have to jump out and do a risk. And that is where I think moving from the logistical, moving from the objective, and then actually doing some work around the subjective can be really helpful. And this is really where I work with a lot of folks in coaching, and where I feel like the coaching that I do at Grow is a lot different than other options that are out there, in that those emotional realities are often way more important than the objective realities. And so I think what you would also need to do, so just as important as a future projection, just as important as gathering that data about the renovation cost, I think there's also real value in writing down every possible scenario that you could, that your imagination can come up with as to how this can go wrong. Come up with, Tim Ferriss, we should put this in the show notes, has this article called Fear Setting. It's something I send to clients sometimes. But it's this idea of actually exploring the nightmare, because oftentimes, going back to childhood, it's actually the fact that we can't see into the closet, and it's dark in the room. We can't see in the closet, so we don't know the monster's not there. So what do you do as a child? You get up and you actually turn the lights on. This is actually what needs to happen with you now, in terms of you actually need to turn the lights on in terms of your own imagination around what could go wrong, and actually start becoming comfortable with the idea that, yeah, that is a possibility, but you need to define what those possibilities are for you. Because sometimes in doing, if we had more time, but sometimes in actually exploring that with clients, they find that, oh, actually, there's only really 2 or 3 scenarios. But until you define them, you actually think, oh, it's probably like 86 ways this could go wrong. But actually, it's only 2 or 3. And then in defining what those are and exploring that, you can actually begin to reverse any negativity or limiting beliefs you have around those things, and start bringing objectivity to the subjective fear that you have. And that's something that, again, if we had more time, or maybe, if there was a little more privacy around it, in other words, it might not be the best thing to do in a public forum, but kind of exploring those fears, because sometimes weird stuff comes up, like money fears that I confronted with my coach 10 years ago, or going on 10 years ago. That's not something I would have wanted to do in public, because it actually forced me to confront some things about my childhood and relationships with family members and things like that. Like, it kind of gets messy when you really start to unpack those things. But I would just say that defining what the possible negative outcomes that you're imagining could happen could be really helpful, just as a kind of a way to summarize that.
If I can identify what I think could go wrong, I could also maybe have a plan of how I would get out of it.
Yeah,
potentially. Yes. Yeah.
Daniel, one thing you said that I really appreciate there, because it's a mantra that I keep writing down for myself every day, which is like, learn through action, right? Because I tend to have the kind of mind that wants to really contemplate, and so I'm sort of trying to retrain a version of self around what you're talking about, Daniel. Like, well, what are the worst case scenarios? Okay, well, write them down. And then also therefore have that inspire you to take some version of a real action. So for you, Margaret, it's like, okay, yeah, of course you need a contractor to go look at walk the space with you. Like, obviously you've gotten your list of all the things that need to happen. You need to write that concisely for the contractor, who may or may not know that. And then you need to find 1 or 2 or 3 that are going to walk the space. The rule of thumb is you always get 3 bids. So where are those 3 bids going to come from? They're going to come from your network of friends and family. They always do. right? So you're just going to start pounding your phone, texting everyone you know, Aunt Jane, didn't you once renovate a house? Who did the job, right? So those are taking those actions, and by walking the property with 3 different perspectives and getting 3 bids, which they'll all do, it's very normal for them to do that for free. That's what they do. That's how they create leads and convert new customers, is through doing these estimates. Obviously, you're going to get closer to useful information. And when I was rereading your email and writing my own Evernote, we were prepping for meeting you today. One of the things I wrote in the Evernote was just like, what's the cost of useful information versus guessing? What's the cost to you of getting something you trust, which goes directly to what Daniel just shared. He's like working through why you think there's a monster in the closet. The cost of getting the useful information is that you realize there isn't. And now you just have a simple analysis task ahead of you. How much capital are you going to need, and how many more years is it going to take to pay off than you originally estimated? Because that's the only thing you're actually doing, is instead of paying it off in 5 years, you're paying it off in 10. That's the only actual, like Daniel said, it's usually not that scary. It's just stretching your line out on the spreadsheet to be like, oh, I can't pay this off in 5 like I originally hoped, because it costs $280,000 to build instead of $180,000.
Okay.
Right? So there's questions like that you come up with, and we want to stay in a space of action, but we want to invest our most valuable resource, which is time, in the right places. If I were to ask you right now, based on what Daniel and I shared, you've got a lot of different options. Where do you think your time is most valuable? Where would you spend it in the next 7 days?
Writing out the financial projection for a number of students. So getting that more clear on that. And then lots of messages to friends and family, trying to get some more leads on architects. Okay,
that's a good 7 days. That's definitely
okay.
That's all 7 days, because you're also running a business and have a personal life and hobbies and everything else. Okay, what are you going to get done in the next 30 days?
Well, if I want this property, I'm going to have to move forward on it. So,
what's a specific action? Where are you going to invest your time? You've written a spreadsheet. You've texted a bunch of people. What are you going to do in between
reach out
day
to
8
the
and day 30?
Recommendations for people they've hopefully given me and try to schedule meetings with them and see if they will walk the property with me for free, maybe. Like you said, I don't know. I didn't realize that. I thought I had to pay for their time from the beginning. So
they all give, they give estimates. Can I reframe that last thing? Between day 8 and 30, you will have walked the property 3 times with 3 different contractors and received 3 estimates. Because the hard part is not them showing up at 5 on a Friday and walking the property with you. They'll all do that. The hard part is getting them to send you the estimate. So you're going to be just pounding on them after they walk the property and being like, hey, wondering, can I swing by the office? Would love to just check in on that. What do you need from me to get it done? I can't, if I forwarded you all of my versions of those emails,
okay.
So just frame it a little bit more in, here's the dream outcome. So this is what's going to happen. And then stay in that space while also doing precisely what Daniel just shared, which is the subjective work. Which is like, man, why is it a bummer for me to even make this text? Why am I kind of like, this just seems like too much. I'm just going to go back and teach my group piano class today. This is better. Those are the deep questions that Daniel's referencing, right? And by the way, I only have one other thing to share with you, because I pulled up Kurt, for your benefit, I pulled up my projections through 2030, which I looked at. The last time I looked at that was like 3 years ago. And then I have my 2024 number that I wrote down, and I now know what my 2024 number is. So I'm going to tell you how off I was. That's just giving you like an open and honest, totally transparent. We can do all the objective work, as Daniel says, but it should never, it's not enough. Okay. Right? We still need to just be like, okay, I did the best I could. I'm moving forward, or I'm not. You know, in my case, I moved forward, and now we've been in the space for over a year. It's glorious. It's amazing, and has all these benefits. Was I totally accurate on the net income I was going to make in 2024 from it? You'll soon find out. So you seem very disciplined, Margaret, and you seem you're willing to be methodical and do the work. Just maybe your optimism gets wanes at times. Maybe, you know. Okay, let me share you this. I have to give you one other tactic, another thing you need to add to your list, because I shared my order of operations a little bit incorrectly. So I did go to Joel, my longtime friend, and we've hired him a few times, who's the architect, right? And I asked him to just sketch something, which he did actually just as a favor, right? You can pay someone to do a quick sketch, but what you need for them to do a quick sketch, which is literally just like, I mean, they're not writing up plans that you can build from. They're writing up a piece of paper that you can print out and bring with you to the contractor and be like, hey, so all they need are the dimensions of the new building. And then, but the other thing they need from you is they need your vision for how many classrooms, you know, what the waiting room's going to be like. And that's where you link to your forecast, your projection. You're like, I'm going to have 4 group piano rooms or whatever you're having. And again, don't overthink this. This is literally 30 minutes, set a timer with your Evernote and just write down, here's all the things that I want to fit into this building, right? So draw your vision of what you want, then create your simple projection based on the number of classrooms and what you're going to offer in them. And then pound the pavement looking for some architects who will do it cheap or free to sketch something up for the future opportunity of doing this job. And then go to those 3 contractors with that simple sketch. And if you can't get a simple sketch, don't worry about it. Just go with your initial vision plan. Hey, we're going to fit this many rooms. They're going to be about this size. That's all the contractor really needs to sort of visualize. Dig it? Okay. Does that sort of make sense, the order of events? Sweet. Okay, let me give you, as promised. So this is a spreadsheet that I built as a 10-year forecast. It does wonders for bringing you peace of mind to be able to see where you might be in 10 years using the best information you have, which is basically your historical data on what you've been able to do so far at MF Music Studio, right? So I said that by 2030, our new space would generate close to $600,000 in net income, right? So that's sort of, people call it profit, but it actually would go to taxes. It goes to reinvestment in the business, all sorts of things. But that's net income. So that would be, but now that's all the way to 2030, which is way too far away. Who knows what's happening then? So let's go to 2024, which is this year. This year, we thought we would have about $390,000 in net income from the new space, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually where we were basically in our rebuilding pre-COVID from 2019. It's right around in there, right? This year, however, we're likely going to have more like $250,000 in net income. So I was off by about $100 and some $1,000. Are we making it work? Of course we are. But am I readjusting for next year to see what I can learn from 2024? Yep. But that's, some of the other estimates were closer, but it wasn't so far off that it was debilitating. Does it sound so far off to you that you're like, I have no faith, I would never say yes to that?
I don't know those big numbers, so.
Okay, well then just let me ask you another question. What percentage of your gross revenue is net income? Do you know that percentage by any chance? No? Okay, no worries. Reach out to me anytime if you want help once you get your forecast. We'll spend 10 minutes and just rock some percentages and numbers for you. Okay? Yeah, I think I'll just say this. We don't need to know big. We don't need to know small. We just need to know our business. The scale of your business is all that matters, is what you know and what you've operated. And then, as Daniel put it, imagining something even greater, right? But being disciplined enough to use the information that you already have at your fingertips that you understand, right? A lot of people reach out and they're like, I want to grow a 7-figure music school and I want to have an immaculate 10-year forecast or something. And you're like, okay, love it. I don't think that's actually going to serve you right now. And we need to work from the area of understanding that we're currently at, right? And then we can develop fluency and awareness from there.
Okay. Yeah. I will just say that I dwelt there for a second on the negative side. Define the fear. I think the other side too, for both carrot and stick, would be define the dream outcome for yourself as well. Define what this is going to do for you. I find that most people move slowly because of that lack of definition. And the more definition that one puts into both the negative side and the positive side, it will help you to move forward. What most people do is they wait until they have more information, but as we already said, more information isn't enough. It's an emotional reality. And so it's often good just to aggressively act, because here's the deal. You might do those 3 walkthroughs and things that they say, offhand observations they make, things that you notice, you might become so much more internally resolved to either move forward or not move forward simply because of something that happens as you do those walkthroughs. It is so fascinating to me how just making a decision to act in the smallest way is helpful, because you doing those walkthroughs isn't what's going to determine whether or not you move forward in this project. But a lot of times we wait to act until we know, so to speak, that yes, I definitely want to move forward on this, but it's actually the next tiny step. That's all we got to do. We don't need to worry about the big thing. And so what I've learned over the years is that I only need to take tiny steps in moving forward on something, because there's like 18 tiny steps before I actually have to make a decision. And then usually a series of things happens as I take those tiny steps to either confirm or disconfirm the overall idea. And there are times where I just saw this opportunity and I said, oh, that's interesting. Now, I don't know if I want to, the whole reason Bethany works for me is because at the time I really didn't need someone, but I knew, she's going to hear this, I knew she was such a quality person. I was like, you know what? I should just go have an interview with her. I don't really need someone, but she is so quality. I should just have a conversation. So we went out for coffee, had a conversation, was further impressed with her. Then I go back to my ops manager. I ask, what could we do? And it ended up materializing. And now, like, it was one of the best decisions I made in the business in the last 5 years was that. And there are so many stories I could tell where I didn't even really know what I was doing sometimes, but something felt right about it. And my thought was, I don't need to make a decision now. Here's the next 3 steps I could take to see if this feels comfy, to see if this feels good. And for you, you've already defined for yourself, and Nate here, and I, as we've talked about this, we've got some steps, some intermediary steps. So you can move forward on that. And yes, it is a little bit of an opportunity cost, but the faster you take the steps, the quicker you get to that internal feeling of resolve or oh no, I think this isn't a good move, but maybe this house would be, maybe in driving over to the location, you see a house you never noticed before. And it's in a bet. It's little. It's that kismet. It's those little tiny chances, and it's just we have to open ourselves up to those things. And the way we do that is to be open, positive, optimistic, fundamentally optimistic about opportunity and being open to it. But I think most of us, and I'm guilty of this too. Even the stories I just told, I'm still sometimes I catch myself being negative about something. Like, wait, whoa, what? Why am I just automatically saying, "Oh, that would never work"? That is such a bad attitude to have, and I get on myself when I catch myself doing that. Oh, that wouldn't work. Wait, Daniel, you have no proof that wouldn't work. Why are you just telling yourself that? So that's my thought. Tiny steps, aggressive action, do it as fast as possible, be fundamentally optimistic, but also with a commitment to realism or being realistic underneath that optimism.